The show opens in Wrocław, Poland in the year 1997. A fax detailing the urgency of an incoming flood is sent to politician Jakub Marzak's office, but he and his colleagues think that it's not that serious and decide to ignore it for now. They were really serious, they'd have texted us. The scene then cuts to 6 weeks later, and we meet Jasmina Tremer, a determined and logical person living in the Netherlands with her partner. Turns out she was the one who sent the fax, as she is a hydrologist by profession. While measuring the water levels in the surrounding swamps, she spots a beautiful mother doe and her fawn. She tries to have a better look, but a careless hunter suddenly opens fire on it. Jasmina rushes to the site to save the injured animal. Sadly, it's too late, and the doe passes away. This enrages Jasmina so much that she grabs the hunter by the collar and takes away his ID. Now we finally know how Bambi really ended. She then returns to her van, where she temporarily lives with her partner. After discussing the matter with him, Jasmina goes inside the private room and takes a sip of methadone, a medicine that helps people quit their use of heroin. The couple then proceeds to have a romantic time by engaging in coitus. Unfortunately, their moment is interrupted by the arrival of a massive helicopter outside. It turns out to be a meth hallucination. Oh no, it's the Polish military, who want Jasmina's urgent presence in Wrocław. In the next scene, Jasmina travels to the emergency headquarters in the city. Upon arriving, she is welcomed by the politician Jakub, who also happens to be her old pal. He guides her to his office, where she meets several commanders and scientists. A broadcast network is also present to provide updates and inform the public. During the meeting, Jasmina shares her recent findings, stating that Wrocław is on the brink of flooding and urgent emergency actions are needed to prevent catastrophic consequences. However, she learns that the team relies on outdated data from the 1960s. This means that they are poorly prepared for the impending flood. When they ask for an ideal model to follow, she promptly requests detailed data sets and maps to work on. Jasmina then assures them that the model will be ready by tomorrow, which will help them make critical decisions to stop the flood. And in the meantime, they're going to need some water wingies and pool noodles stat. The next day, Jasmina walks with the colonel to inspect the city's water level. She immediately comes to the conclusion that the underground water is rising up. The two then travel to the nearby village of Keti, where she realizes that if the water rises by 2 more meters, the flood banks will fail. While inspecting, Jasmina meets a local resident, André Rebakis, and discusses the flood risk with him. She examines his house's basement and finds damp walls, which surprises even Andres. He pees on those sometimes when he's had too much vodka, but this is nuts.
What the hell was that?
The conversation then shifts to his father, a war veteran who is now bedridden in the city hospital. Jasmina hopes to speak with him to learn about past flooding events. In the meantime, Jakub arrives near a reservoir and discovers an event is scheduled to take place there. He becomes furious at the organizers for not shutting it down, despite repeated warnings. The manager tries to ignore him, but Jakub threatens to fire him from his position, forcing him to comply. Afterward, Jakub visits a bakery run by an elderly lady, Mrs. Basia. It is evident that he's a regular customer, as he picks up some loaves of bread and hastily leaves for the apartment next door. He then heads to the home of bedridden and overweight Mrs. Tremer, who turns out to be Jasmina's mother. It is revealed that Jakub is currently taking care of Mrs. Tremer because she and Jasmina have an estranged relationship. Or do he and Mrs. Tremer have a strange relationship? The next day, Jasmina prepares her model plan and discusses it with her fellow male counterparts. Based on her findings, she stresses the urgency of taking immediate action to prevent flood damage. She points out that the underground water is so extensive that the trees are turning yellow. While the northern states are at risk, the city center remains safe for now. Jasmina suggests blowing up the flood banks in a nearby village of Domaniwo to create a corridor for the river to flow freely. According to her assessment, this measure would help mitigate major flooding. Jakub is concerned because the flood banks protect them from rising water levels, so he questions Jasmina about why they would consider blowing them up. She responds that flood banks actually raise the water levels, and although they're good for minor or moderate floods, they're counterproductive in major flooding. With this information, Jakub is finally convinced, and he orders the military to prepare for the demolition plan. The next day, when Jasmina arrives at Domaniwo by helicopter, she discovers a weir and several buildings by the river. She notices that the topography doesn't match the one that is detailed in the provided maps. Upon putting 2 and 2 together, it quickly dawns on her that the maps are from the year 1967. The pilot then informs her that the weir was constructed a few years ago ago to support the Latka Dairy enterprise. This new information impacts her hypothesis, as ecological changes significantly alter the basis for their judgments. It means that areas near rivers evolve over time. Upon realizing the change in topography, Yasmina urges the pilot to return to the city immediately. She goes straight to Yakub's house and explains that their plan to blow the Domaniwo flood banks is now worthless. She asks him to call it off, and he rushes to inform the military about it. However, the line doesn't work properly in the remote plains of Domaniwo. Just as he attempts to communicate the message to the army, the colonel ends up blowing up the flood banks. This results in the flooding of Latka Dairy, hurting a significant number of herds. The next day, the delegate blames Yasmina for proposing a flawed approach, but she counterblames them for providing her with an outdated map. She also warns them that the city center is at risk of flooding. According to Yasmina, the differences in ground level within the city will cause the river to rise rapidly, and when the water will have nowhere else to go, it will ultimately flood the city center. Yasmina emphasizes that there is already 3 times as much water as usual. While they are discussing the matter, a news reporter overhears their conversation. After the meeting, Yakub confronts Yasmina about her past heroin addiction, suggesting that her error in judgment might be related to this issue, but she disregards him and storms out of the office without giving a proper answer. Later, the news reporter offers her a ride back home in exchange for information. Yasmina agrees, and during their ride, she reveals that since there are 5 rivers in the city, their converged waves will flood the whole province. This means that the entire city will basically be gone. The reporter is terrified at the revelation, while Yasmina hastily tells her to stop the car in front of a familiar building. The rumor about the flooding soon spreads throughout the city, causing panic among the residents. In the next scene, Yasmina arrives at her mother's apartment door and slips a notice, warning about the flood risks and urging her to leave the housing immediately. She then goes to Mrs. Basia's market, where the elderly lady greets her warmly. In a private conversation, Yasmina asks the lady to move her mom into her apartment for a few days. Basia agrees, and also reveals that Yakub has been taking care of her mom for some time now. Slightly surprised, Yasmina nods her head as a thankful gesture before leaving the market. Later, Yakub's daughter, Kiara, visits the hospital where Yasmina is staying and asks about her relationship with her father. Yasmina engages the teenager with some trivial details about their work together, but avoids telling the full truth. Just then, Yakub arrives at the scene and urges Kiara to wait for him in the car. Once they're alone, Yasmina clarifies that she didn't tell anything to the little girl. It is then revealed that the two used to date, and Kiara is actually her daughter. However, their relationship never worked out because of Yasmina's past heroin addiction. Later, she heads to the train station only to find it shut down due to the flooding. Left with no choice, Yasmina returns to the village of Keti for further inspection. While at it, she trips on a branch and tumbles on the plain ground below. This is when she discovers a water reservoir and a German railway track underneath a bridge that joins the village with the town. Realizing something is amiss, Yasmina rushes to the city hospital to speak with Andre's father about the flood. The old man then reveals that a viaduct was built where trains used to go through during the war, and the crane water reservoir was used for the steam engines. Hearing this, Yasmina gets worried, so she immediately rushes out of the hospital. She heads straight to the headquarters and informs Yakub that the river in Keti village is returning to its old riverbed. Now, the best possible solution is to blow up the flood banks. Yakub thinks executing such a task is going to be very difficult, as a lot of residents live there, but Yasmina asserts that this is the only way to prevent a major flood. After she leaves, Yakub brings up the idea with his political party's vice minister. However, the latter ridicules the plan and orders him not to proceed because it would upsurge potential media backlash. Instead, he advises manipulating the media to their advantage. Following his senior's orders, Yakub instructs his secretary to leak the information about the demolition plan in Keti village. Soon, the media reports the plans to blow the flood banks of Keti and the surrounding village areas. This operation is supposed to keep the city center of Wrocław from getting flooded by the incoming wave. Later, when Yasmina arrives at the village with the army, the villagers block their path to the flood banks and resist the plan. They are understandably furious about being sacrificed for the city's sake, while receiving no help for their own flooding. Meanwhile, Kiara goes through her father's private drawers and finds some photos of him with Yasmina. Intrigued, she keeps them with her and hastily locks the drawer. When she hears someone approaching, it's her father, who urges her to get her belongings ready as soon as possible. Yakub then drops her off at his housekeeper's place to prepare for the impending flood. Following this, he heads to the office and holds a press conference to reassure the public that the situation in Wrocław is under control. Yasmina arrives just in time to hear him announce the suspension of his political campaign due to the crisis. She becomes furious when she realizes that he's lying about the flooding and storms out of the office. Yakub follows her, trying to explain explain his situation, but Yasmina is more concerned about Kiara's safety. She quickly obtains their daughter's current address and rushes there. Meanwhile, rats start emerging from the canals and scattering throughout the neighborhoods due to rising water levels. Upon arriving at the doorstep, Yasmina warns Kiara not to leave the building for the next couple of days to ensure her safety. The teenager nods her head in agreement and says she wants to show something. She then goes inside and retrieves the photos she found in her father's drawer. But to her dismay, Yasmina has already left the apartment. She knew where this was going and she bailed hard. Meanwhile, Yakub discovers that the earlier event he had cancelled has now been given the green light by the vice minister. This enrages him and he ends up getting into an argument with the event manager, but his efforts to stop them remain futile. On the other hand, Yasmina rushes to her mother's place to warn her about the flood and convince her to leave her house. However, her mom chides her for finally worrying about her after years of abandonment. She feels saddened by the fact that Yasmina and Yakub couldn't reconcile their relationship. As the two continue arguing, Yasmina notices a wet patch on the wall. From it, several spiders are crawling towards the upper floor to apparently avoid the flooding. This sends Yasmina into a state of panic as she realizes the city is about to be hit by a massive catastrophe. She then rushes out to call the governor from the US Embassy and informs him about their dire situation. In the meantime, the news of rising water levels scares the villagers of Keti, so they prepare themselves with sandbags to fend off the flood. Fat lot of good those are gonna do. At the city hospital, a nurse observes the significant rise in water levels in the garden and promptly alerts the senior doctor. At the same time, we see authorities at the city zoo evacuating the animals in a grim turn of events. A staff informs the manager that one of their deadly crocodiles, named Wally, has escaped. The final scene shows the crocodile casually heading towards the city center.
All right, mate, here comes Wally!
Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.